One last blast of winter for the southeast highlights the middle of March. Some rain associated with the cold air, but is it enough to improve drought conditions? We will answer this and more in the mid-March edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Today we will take a little closer look at the reservoirs in the southeast. This is a critical time for some of the reservoirs, especially at the tops of the basins, that help to supply water to communities across the area. We are nearing the transitional time between winter to spring recharge and flooding season to a more convective summer season that really gets started off in June. Jeff will get us started by looking at the rainfall across our area.
So let's look at the last 30 days of precipitation, and we see we've been wet across our western sections and dry across the east, sort of a half-and-half situation. Alabama with some reds and oranges indicating 4 to 5 inches plus, but you see all the green across Florida and the Florida Peninsula and the Carolinas indicating areas that have seen less than 2 inches from mid-February through mid-March, which is one of our wettest times of the year. So when we look at departures from normal, we see a lot of yellows, meaning more than an inch deficit, and several areas under the beige, indicating 2-inch deficits in just the past 30 days. A 30-day period that, again, is usually a very wet period for the southeast. And we see this in the stream flows, below to well below normal stream flow for many rivers and streams across the region, at a time when stream flows should be running relative to the year at high levels. This is especially true in the Carolinas and Georgia, given the dry weather and low stream flows. How are our reservoirs looking? Well, let's start in North Carolina, and we see we are not too bad. Pools, all of them are around or near target pool. Looking at some of the South Carolina lakes, we see most near target as well, except the Savannah project, where Hartwell and Thurman are several feet from their target pool for this time of year. And finally, over to Georgia, West Point, Allatoona, and W.F. George all looking good, being close to their target pool, which are on the increase as the targets increase toward their summer pool. The two reservoirs with the smaller watersheds, Carter's and Lanier, these two not looking as good as they both are several feet below target pool. And Todd, especially Lanier, running 9 feet below target, and Lanier target goes to 1071 in May from 1070 now. So they typically are looking to increase to that summer pool this time of year. Lanier is such a critical reservoir for water in the North Georgia area. Todd, can you give us a closer look at this reservoir?
Lake Lanier remains about 9 feet below its conservation pool. This is the level the Corps of Engineers would like to maintain during this time of year. The blue line represents the observed pool level, and the red dots give a conservative forecast of where we are going. In addition to being low, you may also notice that the pool has barely risen during this recharge season. This is also very unusual. There's a growing concern as we approach summer that Lanier could be creeping into record territory if we don't see some pretty good rainfall above the lake.
And finally, across Alabama, where it has not been as dry the past month or so, and so the reservoirs here, again, looking pretty good here. So all of them close to their target pools. So let's drop south. Todd, how's it looking down in Florida?
We don't often look at Florida lakes, but as we get to the end of the dry season in Florida, Lake Okeechobee continues to fall. Based on our current forecast, we expect the lake to continue falling until we get to late May and June, as this is when we usually start to see the wet season kick in. We are still a long way from the water shortage management line depicted by the lower black line in the graph, but we are below the average elevation for this time of year. Now we'll get back to Jeff for a little more on climatology.
So let's jump to look at where we have been and how that may lead to where we are going. And here is the February temperature rankings, and we can see that we were much above normal across a large part of the country in February, records in many states. This early warm-up has led to much of the vegetation coming out early. And when we look at the spring leaf index anomaly provided by the National Phenology Network, we see we are several weeks ahead as far as vegetation popping out and flowering across a large part of the country. Why is this important to hydrology? Well, because it plays a role in the efficiency of runoff and thus stream flows, floods, and droughts. And as far as drought, here is the latest drought monitor, and we see drought to the south and drought to the north. Extreme drought still holding across northeast Georgia and the far southern Appalachian Mountains. And how has this changed since the last time we talked? Well, you could guess, yes, drought has expanded a bit across the Carolinas and also parts of Florida over the past few weeks with the dry weather.
The short-term outlook through Sunday, March 19th will be mainly characterized by a cold front and the associated precip. This front will be entering the southeast on Saturday, and by Sunday morning we can expect the majority of the southeast to be behind the front. The upper-level forcing associated with this system is such that the precip amount should diminish as the front moves further south. We'll start the midterm period with high pressure across the area, and we're expecting another front to be moving in by midweek. By the end of this period, models still have the front across the area, and they have an area of low pressure far to our west. More on this in a bit. The 7-day precip forecast shows that the precip associated with the two fronts will mostly bring rain to the northern portion of the area. That's partially because precip associated with that first front is forecast to decrease as it moves further south on Saturday, and also partially because the second front is currently forecast to stall out after it moves into the area. The long-term outlook is for below normal precip amounts in the Florida Peninsula and above normal amounts to the northwestern portion of the area where that low at the end of the midterm period could move through. The reason why we have to be careful interpreting model output this far out is because the models often diverge significantly. In this case, one model shows the low moving eastward and brings the associated precip well into our area. Another model moves the low to the northeast and keeps much of that rain to the north of us.
As we come out of La Nina and approach the spring season, the ENSO predictions begin to have a little more relevance. At this time, a weak El Nino is hinted at by the model forecast. This might likely affect us in late summer and early fall. More on that as we get into the summer. The March outlook from the Climate Prediction Center shows equal chances for above normal, near normal, and below normal rainfall in the southeast. Since we are in neutral conditions and models are not hinting at wetness or dryness, with some wetness indicated in the southwest corner of our area, I have a little hope that maybe we might at least see normal rainfall during April. We'll see about that. With the leaves already on the trees and it looking to remain warm, we will need much above normal rainfall to see improvement in drought-stricken areas. As for the April through June forecast, very similar, where we have some potential for above normal rainfall in the southwest corner. Otherwise, equal chances of above, near, and below normal rainfall through the rest of the southeast. And for the July to September forecast, much of the same. Again, the models are not hinting one way or the other right now, so the forecasters at the Climate Prediction Center can't do a lot with those forecasts, which is a lot of the reason we see equal chances. Today, NOAA released its spring flood outlook, and so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about our spring flood outlook. Now, we really are getting to the end of our flooding season, so it doesn't apply quite as much to this region of the country. However, right now, it looks like a below normal risk through much of the southeast. The only places where we have maybe a normal risk is in the panhandle of Florida, South Alabama, some of those areas that have seen rain over the winter. We have a below normal risk over Florida. There's not typically flooding during this time of year in Florida. Again, we worry about that more as we get into summer and their rainy season, where there's the potential for flooding during that time of year. So our bottom line looks like an active pattern, but most of the rain stays north and west. We don't get a whole lot of tap out of the Gulf, and we don't get quite as much. It doesn't look like we get as much rainfall over the southeast. It kind of stays just out of our area, but it is active. We could see some fronts come through and bring some cooler air, just not a whole lot of moisture to work with. As for the long term, as we talked about before, it looks like more normal type rainfall for spring could go either way right now. And so, again, we'll be watching that very closely. And we'll talk more about that in our next Water Resources Outlook, which we plan to record on April 13th.